In my early 20s, I learned that my company was going to transfer me from my college town to the area that I had grown up in, which I thought was really convenient for a number of reasons. I ended up staying at my mother's house for a couple of weeks while I was looking for an apartment in that area because she still lived in that area. Well, since I didn't have a car at the time, when the 2 weeks were over that I was staying, my friend came to pick me up from that area and decided to surprise me by bringing along my boyfriend. Well, that was cool, but I was kind of embarrassed. This guy was so outside of the type of person I would ever want to meet my parents. You know what I'm saying? But my mother ended up gushing over how much she liked him. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. She even suggested that I invite him to move with me to the area that I was moving to. And since all I wanted was for my mother to approve of me, what do you think I did? Yep, I invited him, and within 5 months we were married. Of course, I married him behind her back because, well, I knew that she would not approve, despite the fact that it was her suggestion to bring him along. And I would like to note here that I actually only knew him for about 3 weeks before I invited him to come with me. He was not someone I planned on keeping around after I moved. My mother was, of course, horrified and offended by what I did and told me in no uncertain terms, it's a mistake. Of course, it was a mistake, but we'll get to that another time. But by then, she had already decided she no longer liked him and had nothing but negative things to say. And like I said, to be fair, he would turn out to be a covert narcissist, but that's another story. The thing is, though, that I married him even though I wasn't really that into him. And in fact, I had sort of planned on breaking it off when I moved. It just seemed convenient, I guess. Since my mother seemed to approve of him, I took her cue rather than following my own heart. And this is the moral of the story. There would be devastating consequences in that relationship, and any of you who have taken my webinar, which you can find at queenbeing.com after this session, I tell that story in pretty graphic detail in that webinar. But there would be devastating consequences for years well beyond that relationship as a result of that relationship. But I'm sharing this with you because it is just one of many examples where I made a significant life choice based on what someone else wanted instead of what felt right to me. So how many times have you not followed your heart because you were worried about what people might think? How often have you avoided doing something that you truly wanted to do because you couldn't stand the idea that other people would judge you? How often have you based your major life choices on your own desires as opposed to having allowed other people to influence you? Do you have regrets because maybe you've given someone else the power to make decisions in your life, whether directly or indirectly? I know I do. Well, did. I try not to regret anything now. Have you ever chosen a job or a partner or a home because someone else thought you should do that? I would say nearly any survivor, in fact, many people who haven't even gone through narcissistic abuse, but especially those of us who have, we've made a choice in our lives, a major life choice, based on what someone else wanted or their opinion. And very often it's a toxic person who has controlled us on some level. And while there are certainly times when it's appropriate to get opinions of other people, there are plenty of times that we regret not following our own intuition. But the thing is, when you accept the advice of someone else because you feel like it's right for you, you're still following your own gut, your own intuition. And then you can consider that inspired action. But when you bend to someone else's will to please them despite how you feel about it, well, you're shortchanging yourself in the happiness department, and that's not fair to you or maybe other people in your life. But why do we care so much about what other people think? What makes us do that? Well, first of all, it is generally human nature to care what other people think. From the time that we're born, we learn very quickly that when we do what someone else wants us to do, they become happy with us, and that feels good. Part of that kind of goes back to as people pleasers, as people who have been in toxic relationships and we become people pleasers, we end up maybe going a little on the unhealthy side of trying to make other people feel good or be happy with us. But as we get older and we learn to make the occasional unpopular decision, we're shocked to learn that these toxic people, they stop being nice to us when we don't follow their advice for living. And this, I don't know if it's shocking to you, but it has been shocking to me even when it happened repeatedly in my life. I was always shocked to find that people would stop being nice to me when I made my own choice instead of following their choices. But ultimately, we care what people think because we are taught by these toxic people that we should base our identities on the messages that they give us. When our parents tell us, you did a good job by following the rules, if they tell us that, for example, we start to think, well, in order to feel good, I better follow the rules, right? Or when our kindergarten teachers scold us for coloring outside the lines, we start to think, I better stay in the lines or else we're wrong. We take the messages that we hear about ourselves from others in everyday life, we take those messages and we internalize them to such an extent that we find ourselves dependent on the approval of others for our own self-worth. And again, this can happen to anyone, but this is especially true for people who go through toxic relationships because quite literally, we are taught from very early in our lives, if we are raised by toxic people, that if you don't do what I say, you're not good. And sometimes there are devastating consequences that come with not doing what people say, whether it's a physical thing or a mental thing, something negative comes our way. So are we supposed to just stop caring about this stuff, or what are we supposed to do? Well, you have to see that this is a two-sided coin here. While we do certainly need to follow our hearts, and we need to understand and listen to our own intuition, and then take inspired action as necessary in order to make our own life choices, there are times when we have to follow the rules. For example, in order to be productive members of society, we need to follow certain societal norms. And at the very least, we have to follow the laws of the land. Most of us aren't able to just kind of stop caring or turn off caring about what other people feel or think, especially people we care about. We feel the need to get their approval about our choices and our lives. And when we care about toxic people, it's a toxic situation. Even when we're out of these relationships, a lot of times we forget that we don't need to make everybody else around us happy. And we continue to live like we are sort of bound by other people's desires and needs. We don't want to become cold and immune to the emotions of other people. We want other people to be happy, but we still want to be happy too, right? So how do we find the balance? I think to be happy, the first thing we have to do is we have to make our own choices. Whether we take someone else's advice or not should only be based on the fact, do we or do we not agree with or feel that advice is right for us? We have to follow our own inspiration, our own intuition, if we're going to create the lives that we want. At the end of the day, we are the ones that have to live with these decisions we're making. Where does this leave us? Are we doomed to this eternal internal struggle? Or is there something else we can do? How do we start taking charge of our own lives? And how do we stop letting the judgments and opinions of other people dictate our life choices? A lot of times I think we're afraid of what might happen if we don't bend to the wills of other people. It's about not feeling safe making our own choices, and many times this is because we were raised in such a way that if we did make a bad choice or a choice that someone else disagreed with, we were punished severely for it beyond the actual choice because of the fact that we didn't take their advice or their direction or guidance. We worry about what they'll think about us, what they'll say. Do they think we're just all huge jerks now? You know what I'm saying? And so the bottom line, I think, is that if you want to be happy, you have to look inside yourself. You have to look and figure out, what do I really want here? Because I think a lot of us don't even know what we want. Until we know what we want, we might just be kind of going on autopilot, letting life happen to us. And it's all about not letting life just happen to you, but taking it by the horns and owning that whole thing, right? Because we really do have the ability to intentionally choose our life. We do. But once we figure that out, we have to go after it regardless of who's going to be upset about it. You understand what I mean? We can't allow ourselves to be held back or stifled by someone who is going to have a problem with our behavior, especially if our behavior is legal and healthy for the most part. I know that's easier said than done, but here's the question. What's the alternative here? I personally would say that living a life that has been designed and approved by someone other than you is unhealthy and miserable, or at least not happy. So I guess it's about picking your poison. Do you want to live the life that you want and deal with a little bit of dissonance over here? Or do you want to live the life that someone else chose for you and still deal with the BS over there? It's a legitimate question. I suggest that you be happy and you follow your own heart, that you do what you want. And I guess your alternative is to do whatever someone else says, and then you have to deal with those consequences. But in either case, you always have to deal with the consequences or whatever comes next. If you choose to be happy and you make your own choices, you have my respect and applause. Not that you need my approval or anyone else's, what I'm saying. But I'm going to give you a few tips to help you get started on that new, more in control self. First of all, it's about perspective. Let me just ask you to close your eyes for a minute and think about this. What is the worst possible thing that would happen if you made a choice that someone else disagreed with? In most cases, you're going to see a period of brief discomfort. Maybe. It's going to be a little uncomfortable for a while. In most cases, if that person is a healthy person, they're going to accept your decision. And if they don't, that's a whole other ball of wax that I'd like to direct you to think about no contact or low contact. But eventually most people will accept your choice. There are some people who would actually cut you out of their lives for making a choice that they didn't agree with. But are those people really your people? I don't know. I don't think so. People who only like or love you conditionally, again, no contact is an option, or low contact. These people are those who are like, if you do what I think you should do and you act how I think you should act, then I'll love you or I'll like you. Those people, do you really want them having so much control in your life? I don't, personally. So you have to consider the source, is my point here. Think about the relationship that you're in with that person, whether it's a parent thing or a kid thing or a neighbor thing or a spouse thing or whatever it is. Is that person toxic? Is the relationship toxic? The next thing you have to think about is believing what you're saying and what you're doing. I know that sounds weird, but for me, growing up, I always felt like I was not a real person. And so when I had an exciting thing I wanted to do, or I was feeling really passionate about something, I was very often shut down. and told that that was ridiculous or that it was stupid or that I shouldn't be doing that thing. One of the biggest reasons that people feel comfortable telling you what to do with your life is that they think, and that you do, you accept and you expect that they will tell you what to do. When we start to just sort of do what other people tell us, which a lot of us have done from early on, we doubt our inner voice. We doubt our intuition. We doubt that thing inside of us that tells us what we need to be happy. So a lot of us, like I said, we don't even know what we need. Taking the time to figure out what you want and then believing in what you want and believing in what you're saying, it's going to be a huge enhancement to your own choice-making ability. The next time that you choose to make an unpopular decision in your life, I want you to do so with confidence. I want you to recognize that when or if you choose to share that decision with someone who criticizes it, I want you to be prepared and smile. Smile. And say, hey, I understand your concern and I appreciate that you're so worried about me, but I've really thought this through and I have chosen whatever it is carefully. Then leave it at that. You don't have to say anything else. When you acknowledge that you are grateful for the fact that this person cares enough to tell you their opinion, they might feel validated and they might accept your choice a little more gracefully. Now, if we're talking about a toxic person, it might not work out so well, but you can still say that and say it with authority because you are the only person who gets authority in your life. Remember that you're not asking for their permission and you're not asking for their approval. You're stating a fact that this is a choice that you have made. End of discussion. One more little hint for you. Have you guys ever seen that show, My Name is Earl? It ran about 4 seasons. If you haven't, you should take a look at it. It's pretty funny. If you have seen that show, then you're going to know what I'm talking about next here. When you first see this character, Earl, he looks like a former convict who lives in a cheap motel and shares a bed with his brother, and all of those things are true. But if you take a second look, then you're going to notice something kind of special about this dude. When weird stuff happens in front of him, he doesn't judge the stuff. He doesn't judge the people. He never reacts negatively. He just observes. You see him being like this a lot. That's interesting. And I always found that to be kind of inspirational in a weird way because so often, by nature, humans judge. And we judge things that are different than ourselves. And one thing that I have learned the very hard way in my life is to not do that so much. Basically, the way I live my life is as long as you're not hurting anybody and you're mostly legal, do what you will. You know what I'm saying? Don't hurt yourself, don't hurt other people, but do what you will. Be happy, and I promise you I won't judge you. Even if you're not totally happy, I still won't judge you as long as you're doing what feels right to you. And even if you're not, I don't judge anybody. Like attracts like. So once we're away from these toxic people, if we focus on judging or disapproving of other people or situations in our life, what do you think is going to happen? We're going to pull more people toward us who are judging and disapproving of our lives. Feel me? So instead of focusing on that negative stuff, focus on accepting the people around you, the healthy people. You can accept a narcissist, but that doesn't mean you have to let them stay in your life. I think it's actually really important to accept them for what they are, which is a toxic person without empathy, but that doesn't mean you have to let them stay in your life. And again, when we're talking about toxic people or people that are bad for your life, you should accept them for what they are, but that does not mean you let them stay in your inner circle. So just keep that in mind. Look, speaking of accepting other people, why don't we extend that same courtesy to ourselves sometimes? Or all the time. If you're secretly judging and disapproving of your own choices, you need to figure out why. And I'm here to tell you that 80-90% of the time, that's because you're sort of doing the work of the narcissist for them. And what I mean is, for so long, you spent hearing and being judged by this person, hearing about how you weren't good enough or you weren't whatever enough. And so you sort of develop this inner toxic person that wants to stand there and scream and yell about your bad choices, even though they may not be bad choices. It's like leftover narcissist stuff in your head. And I like to see it as sort of like a voice that's not our own. It's a negative inner voice that I believe was sort of planted there by the toxic people in your life. I've told you this before, but if you're struggling with that, imagine that there's a little ladder up the back of your head. This is a pattern interrupt you can use. Close your eyes and imagine there's a little ladder up the back of your neck, and you climb, little mini you climbs up that ladder and goes in there and finds that voice sitting in a chair. Maybe the voice looks like your narcissist. The chair has wheels on the bottom of it, and you push that chair right out of your nose, right out your brain, through your nose. And it's a silly visualization, but it's a good pattern interrupt, and it helps you to remember not to let that voice direct your life, to reach down deep and find your own inner voice, your intuition that tells you, here's what would make me happy, here's what I'd love to do with myself today, and do those things as you're able to do them, or some version of them. Ask yourself, am I doing something that I really believe and feel is wrong, or am I judging myself because of what happened to me in the past. If you are judging yourself because you're doing something that you believe is wrong, figure out why. What are your motivations for that? I mean, most of us don't actively try to do things we feel are wrong. If you're judging yourself because of that old inner voice, push them out the nose, baby. If someone else thinks what you're doing is wrong and you're happy doing that, you got to stand up for yourself. You got to stand up and be who you are. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them an excuse or anything like that. You don't have to justify yourself. Just be who you are and be okay with that. Unapologetically embrace yourself. That's really important here. People who love you will be happy that you're happy. I hope you are with me on this.
Question of the day. Can you relate to making major life decisions based on someone else's opinion?
Share your thoughts, share your ideas, share your experiences in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. As always, thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life. And hey, thanks for letting me be a part of yours. It really does mean a lot to me. Now, before I go, make sure you take a look at the videos I'm leaving for you here and there. And while you're at it, hit the subscribe button so we can stay connected and continue on our healing journey together. I'll see you soon.